You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast, the hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. The CEOs, authors, thought leaders, visionaries, and motivators. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, this is Voss here from thechrisvossshow.com, thechrisvossshow.com. Welcome to the big show, my family and friends. We certainly appreciate you guys always tuning in and coming by. We've got amazing things going on here at the Chris Voss Show. We just recently launched AI with Chris Voss, AI podcast with Chris Voss at AIChrisVoss.com. It's our new AI podcast. We're porting a lot of the interviews we do on the Chris Voss Show for artificial intelligence that is automated, actually. And that's over there as well. The Chris Voss Leadership Podcast is now up at chrisvossinstitute.com. Check that out as well. For the show, your family, friends, and relatives. We have a returning amazing guest and author to the show. Tom Clavin is on the show. Tom, did I get that right?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
There I go. There's so much interview you put in the front of the show. Sometimes the brain goes woohoo right out the door. Everyone knows that. Everyone's seen that movie for 14 years. So Tom Clavin is on the show, returning as a wonderful guest. He has written his newest book that just came out April 4th, 2023. Follow Me to Hell, McNelly's Texas Rangers and the Rise of Frontier Justice. Follow Me to Hell is actually my biography. No, I'm just kidding. So you can order wherever fine books are sold. Tom is on the show with us today. His most recent work is the one I just aforementioned. He's a best-selling author. He's worked as a newspaper and website editor, magazine writer, TV and radio commentator, and a reporter for the New York Times covering entertainment, sports, and the environment. He's received awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, Marine Corps Heritage Foundation, and National Newspaper Association. 4 of his books have become New York Times bestsellers, and his other books have received popular and critical acclaim and all that good stuff. Welcome to the show, Tom. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me back.
Thank you for coming back. It's good to see you again. We love our returning guests. I think if they come back often enough, they get one of those SNL robes, but we haven't gotten SNL to ship them to us. So, Saturday Night Live does that robe thing. Anyway, give us your .coms, Tom, wherever you want people to follow you on the interwebs.
Well, I have a very clever address. It's Tom Clavin, TomClavin.com, TomClavin.com. Has my books, has appearances for a book tour that I just completed, so it's probably obsolete information I should take down. Has a bit of a biography, has contact information. I really do hear on a daily basis from readers, and I reply. So if anybody finds out my email address from my website and contacts me, they'll get a reply.
There you go. And you write a lot about, is it appropriate to call it the Wild West?
It is, the Wild West. And it's interesting about the Wild West because I think our perception from all the TV shows and movies is the Wild West lasted about 100 years. And it really didn't. You think that way, to pack all those characters and action and events. But for the most part, the Wild West began after the Civil War ended. And by really the early 1880s, the Wild West was becoming less wild. I mean, we just had more civilization spreading west. And but during that 17 or 18 year period, it was pretty wild. And there were a lot of very colorful characters. And there never seems to be a lack of people to write about.
I thought the Wild West lasted for only 10 or 20 years in the 60s with John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. No, I'm just kidding. He did a couple movies about Westerns. So tell us about this new story. Why did you decide to pick the story of the Texas Rangers?
I sort of stumbled upon it, which is mostly the way that I find ideas. It was a few years ago. I was working on my book called Wild Bill about Wild Bill Hickok. And one of the significant, not major characters, but significant characters in the Wild Bill story is a fellow named John Wesley Hardin, who is one of the most prolific man killers and gunslingers of the Wild West. And it mentioned he and Wild Bill have kind of a confrontation in Abilene, Kansas. And then he leaves and goes on to other adventures. And I was doing some research, and one writer had put the beginning of the end for Hardin was when he was chased out of Texas by Leander McNelly of the Texas Rangers. So I sort of filed that away because I said he was a pretty hard case, this guy, John Wesley Harding. What was it about McNelly that made him so imposing that he could chase John Wesley Harding out of his native Texas? And so I sort of filed that away. And then I stumbled across something else, which is that in 2023, this year that we're in, last I looked anyway, is the bicentennial of the Texas Rangers. They were founded in August 1823. And I thought, wow, that's an amazing accomplishment or achievement that you can have a law enforcement organization that's 200 years old. I mean, 100 years older than the FBI. And I sort of put the two and two together and said, I'd love to write something about the Texas Rangers for the bicentennial. Well, let me check out this guy, McNelly. And the more I found out about him and about his adventures mostly in the 1870s, the more I thought this would be a good story, because you have this uncommon combination of somebody who really played an important role in the American West, or as far west as Texas is. And yet most people don't know about some of his amazing adventures, which is good for a writer, because you think, I can tell a good story and not be telling the same story about the same character. How many books can you write about Billy the Kid, for example? But
That's true.
Here's somebody different.
Yeah. So tell us about McNelly. Who was this guy, and how did he end up forming the Texas Rangers?
He was a native of Virginia. He had suffered from what they called in those days consumption. So at a young age, his family moved to Texas, thought the climate might help him. And so he spent his teenage years in Texas. He joined the Civil War when he was 17 years old. As soon as it broke out, he served with the Confederate Army. After 2 years, he was still, I don't even think he was 20 yet. He was a captain of a Ranger, a Confederate roaming scouting company. Had a very successful Civil War career, meaning that he survived and had a bunch of adventures that are detailed in the book. And then after the Civil War, his main intention was to go back to Washington County, Texas, be a farmer. He got married, had a couple of kids. But the Texas Rangers were being reformed after the Civil War. And the Texas government was taking the bold step of actually coming up with a budget to pay these people to provide law enforcement. And they reached out to some Civil War veterans and said, we need young captains. And Leander McNelly said, sign me up. And for the next several years, he was the leader of a company of Texas Rangers that he wasn't a captain for more than just a few years because his consumption got the better of him. But during that time, they confronted John Wesley Harding. They stopped a war in a county, a Hatfield and McCoy kind of war in one of the counties in Texas. They invaded Mexico and almost started with the Second Mexican-American War. They just had a lot of adventures, a lot of running around, a lot of border patrol, a lot of fights, a lot of conflicts. And so it sounded like with McNelly as the captain, and the title comes from something he told his men when they were about to invade Mexico. He said, I might lead you into hell, but I'll lead you back out again if you follow me. They were fiercely loyal to him. He was partly because of his frailty. What it took for him to go on a horse every day and chase bad guys inspired them to say, if he can do it, we can do it.
Wow. So were they originally ordained official lawmen, or did they start as kind of a local band of guys who were trying to just enforce cattle rustlers and all sorts of illegal activities?
That's a really good question, because what that question covers not just Leander McNelly's company, but it covers the entire Texas Rangers, because earlier in their history, they were basically, they weren't sheriffs, they weren't marshals, they were, they weren't sworn in deputies. They were sort of like Minutemen, like in Lexington and Concord days, where, the British are coming. Let's grab a gun, grab a powder horn, and grab a horse if you have one, whatever you can bring, and meet here, because then we'll band together and we'll react to the crisis. And that was the Texas Rangers formula for decades, especially before the Civil War. Okay, there's been an invasion. Mexico's invaded. Let's get together and fight the Mexicans and send them back across the Rio Grande. Or the Comanches have just invaded, crossed over our western border. Let's get a bunch of guys together with their guns and their horses, and we'll chase them back across into maybe all the way to New Mexico. So that was the way the Texas Rangers operated, and McNelly was one of those transformative Ranger captains after the Civil War, because yes, the Texas government was deciding to actually set up a budget to pay Texas Rangers to be law enforcement officers, which had not really been the case before. And McNelly was one of those rare early officers in the Texas Rangers who he treated his company like a law enforcement company. He trained them. He made sure they could shoot well, that they could ride well, that they would listen to orders, that they were training, that they knew how to do scouting. They even did things like planted informants
Wow.
in rival gangs.
Wow.
And so they were kind of like the very first glimmer of what is the modern Texas Rangers was really during the McNelly years in the early to mid 1870s.
Wow. It sounds like who's the guy who started the FBI
Back
in? Well, Hoover, and then who's the guy before that? Nellie?
There's Elliot Ness.
Elliot Ness.
Elliot Ness was with he was with the I think he was FBI. He was also at one point he was the chief of police of Cleveland, where some of his adventures took place. So most people that wasn't on the TV show. Cleveland didn't sell ratings.
Yeah, I think he start like laying a foundation for didn't he start fingerprints and things like that. So this is kind of interesting. Was one of the problems that Texas couldn't afford, or were they able to pay them to do this? And I know Texas is huge in size, so trying to regulate, of course, back then, was it partially Mexico?
Until it was Spanish. It was all part of Spain's holdings in North America. Then when Mexico won its independence from Spain in 1821, Texas was all part of Mexican holdings, which stretched from the border of Louisiana all the way to California.
Mm-hmm.
And so once Texas became its own republic, which was after 1836, the Alamo, the Battle of San Jacinto, and they became their own republic. One of the things that they really plagued them for years, they had no money. I mean, Texas remains to this day one of those states that's not very fond of taxation.
Mm-hmm.
So when
I don't know, I've seen people's property taxes down there.
But if you have a trouble raising money, then you have different agencies and departments that get the short end of the stick. And for decades, literally decades, the Texas Rangers almost had to. I mean, if you were a Texas Ranger, you were hired as a Texas Ranger. You had to bring part of your contract, so to speak, was you had to bring your own horse and your own gun and your own food.
Wow!
So all they provided you was ammunition.
Did you get free coffee? No,
free coffee. Yeah.
Free coffee and beans.
Decaf though. So
free coffee and beans. That sounds like a Mel Gibson movie. That one.
Mel Brooks.
Mel Brooks. Yeah. Thanks for correcting me there. It's Monday. I'm half asleep. It was the beans and farting a bit that they did. Very funny, sitting around the campfire there. So they do this. You mentioned the tease out that he ran the dude out of Texas. Do you want to tease out any on that?
Yeah, one of the adventures that McNelly's Rangers had is there was a county, DeWitt County in Texas, had these two families, the Sutton family and the Taylor family, and they had this long feud that began before and then during and then after the Civil War, where these family members were constantly battling each other, fighting, shooting each other. They're dropping like flies on either side. And if they just wanted to kill each other, that was sort of like okay, because eventually there was none left. So let them kill themselves out of existence. But a lot of people were getting caught in the crossfire.
Mm-hmm.
So finally, the Texas government, the governor sends McNelly and his Rangers into DeWitt County and says, you got to calm these people down. It made the Hatfields and McCoys look like a skit out of Sesame Street.
Yeah.
These two Sutton and Taylor families hated the heck out of each other. So McNelly's Rangers went in there and they started to basically confront, intimidate, or in turn shoot members of the families and say, you got to, if you can't stop yourselves, we're going to stop you.
Wow.
A in-law of the Taylor family was John Wesley Hardin. And John Wesley Hardin was, more of a bad guy than, say, a Billy the Kid or Jesse James. I mean, this was somebody who killed because he enjoyed it and because he kept getting away with it.
Sounds like a guy I know. No, I'm just kidding. That's not me.
This is pre-tattoos.
Yeah.
And so, as far as I know, maybe he was branded. I don't know. That was the tattoo in Texas in the 1850s and 60s. And 70s.
Oh, really?
You got branded. So McNelly said, all right, I got the way to calm down this whole situation is I've got to track down and arrest or kill John Wesley Hardin. Now, Hardin was a tough guy, but by this point, McNelly had such a reputation as a completely fearless and always coming out on top, whatever conflict he was in. And Hardin said, you know what? I think it's time to leave Texas. And he literally, before McNelly could catch up with him, he left Texas, went to Florida, where the Texas Rangers eventually tracked him down and arrested him and put him in jail for the next 20 years.
So they had jurisdiction to cross over? Or was
Well,
that kind of how the Wild West worked?
Sort of what happened was that is one of McNelly's lieutenants tracked Hardin to Florida.
Wow.
And when they found out that Hardin was on his train that was coming into a station, I think it was Tallahassee or Pensacola, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
The lieutenant, knowing he did not have jurisdiction, hired a local Florida deputy, and said, okay, we're both going to get on this train. Here's the guy we're going to arrest. I can't arrest him. You can arrest him. But once you arrest him, I can become sort of like the transportation manager.
Ah.
You can give me a voucher for train fare that will return Hardin to where he's wanted in Texas. And that's basically how it worked out.
The early days of extradition.
There was a brief shootout. Hardin was arrested, and then he was turned over to the Texas Ranger.
Wow.
And his name, I think, was Armstrong, if I remember correctly. And Armstrong cuffed him, put him on a train, took him back to Texas, where he stood trial.
There you go. Did he get to stop by Disney while he was there? No, I'm just kidding. You really got to hate a guy to go all the way to Florida and fight alligators and flies and everything else that's down there, humidity. You really gotta hate a guy to go there. No, but that's good. This is the early standards of building this. Why do you find and why do you think your audience and hopefully we pick up some new people for your audience? Why do you think people find an affinity for this era of time and these historical?
Well, I think part of it is demographics, in that if you have a demographic like mine, I'm of a generation that's, say, 50 or 55 and older, where when you were a kid, it was commonplace on television to find Westerns. You can still find the occasional Western double feature at the local theater. They were still making Westerns, even though the era of people like James Stewart and John Wayne were declining, in the late 60s, certainly into the 70s. So a lot of those cowboys, so-called cowboy stars were retiring or dying off. Glenn Ford, some of these others. And then, so I think that there's an affinity for American West stories, because it sort of like makes you connect a bit to your childhood, where it was not uncommon to turn on the television and you found Rawhide and Bonanza and Have Gun Will Travel, The Big Valley, and stories like that. I think another part of it is that there's also a generation or two which knows that the so-called Wild West existed, but doesn't know really that much about it. I mean, they recognize a name like Wild Bill Hickok or Jesse James, and Bat Masterson and Wyatt Earp, of course. But they might be curious, well, what did these guys really do that makes them memorable, that made them these iconic characters that we still have name recognition in 2023? So I think there's an audience out there for that. And then I think there's an audience that, since this is not my first book, I've written a bunch of books. After a while, if you either catch an audience and they want to follow you and they want to read your next book, or you've turned to do something else, like you're in sanitation, or you're in you're short order cook, because you couldn't make it as a writer, and which has got to be very frustrating. Thankfully, since I can't cook, I've managed to continue as a writer.
There you go. Well, that's good then. That's good. Well, I think a lot of people are going to love this. We've had a number of authors that have written about Texas on the story, about all sorts of different stories about Texas, and man, they love to light up the YouTube video comments, no matter what it is, especially anybody who talks about some of the checkered history of Texas, and maybe some of the issues of racism. Boy, they really go after those videos. So I know that it's popular to talk about Texas. There's a lot of people. I mean, what is Texas, the second or third most populous state, or is that New York? I know there's a lot of people in Texas. Let's put it that way, and they're very adamant about their independence and stuff. So this is a good story, and the foundings of the thing. I suppose they tease in the book that it's a courageous yet doomed captain and his team of fearless men. Do you want to tease anything out about that, or should we force people to write the book to find out what happens?
Well, I mentioned before, Leander McNelly had consumption, and there was no cure certainly not in the 1870s for consumption. Your best hope was that you could find a somewhat healthy climate, and Texas offered that to some extent. I mean, certainly better than Connecticut or Virginia, where McNelly was originally from. But it was only a matter of time. And also in McNelly's case, he was not one to sit around in his rocking chair, take care of himself. He was out there having these adventures. He was chasing down bad guys with his company of men. They were camping out every night in all kinds of weather. I mean, yes, in Texas, you're not going to get that too much in the way of snowstorms or ice storms, but still, you can have some degrees of weather change. And if you're camping out, it's a rainy night, and you're camping out, you're cold, and you've got consumption. So that's why McNelly could be, in a way, be considered doomed, because he knew he wasn't going to have a long lifespan to begin with, and he didn't do much to help himself along to have a long lifespan. And I think, to explain part of that, I think it was because he knew that he had a disease that is ultimately going to be fatal. And his thinking was, if I'm going to die and going to die young, relatively young, I'd rather do it while I'm on a horse chasing a bad guy than do it lying in bed. So I think that's excuse me. One of the reasons for his fearlessness is that he literally did not fear death, because it would have been preferable to the option.
There you go. Well, it's better to go out with a bang than to what is that old line? Do not go gently into that good night.
There's a Neil Young line. Better the burnout than it is the rust.
Yeah. Or was it the Who? I hope I die young before I get old. Something.
Hope I die before I get old. Yeah.
Which is funny, because I think Roger Daltrey's like 80 or something now.
So he didn't listen to himself.
Yeah. Well, he tried. Bonham got there. And so did Keith Moon. That was dark and too soon. But anyway, they were both wonderful drummers. Anyway, so this has been really insightful. I think people will love it. And as you mentioned, it's a bicentennial. I mean, this is the founding of 200 years of organization that does law enforcement, and a great job of it, and all that good stuff. So give us your .coms, Tom, so you can find you on the interwebs, please.
It is Tom Clavin, TOMCLAV as in Victor, IN.com. And they'll find some other books there too, because some people might or might not be familiar with the previous books like Dodge City and Tombstone and Wild Bill. And nothing has to be read in order, but I think people enjoy the books. I think another thing about it that you asked before about an affinity for it is this book also, I try and inject some kind of humor also. I mean, nobody should read my book thinking that it's humorless and they got to take things terribly seriously. There's some serious stuff in there, but I just was doing a book I'm working on now. There's a piece in there about an outlaw who was killed in 1890, and he wasn't buried until the mid to late 1970s.
Oh,
and what happened? Well, his body was used as a carnival show attraction for decades. And then they lost it in some kind of warehouse for another few more decades. And it was found by a production crew for the TV show $1 Million Man with Lee Majors in the 1970s, when they were unpacking some crates in this warehouse. And so the TV crew found this mummified body. So they eventually buried this guy in 1977. An outlaw had been killed in the 1890s. Now, that's funny.
Yeah, it is an interesting story. I think I know who you're talking about. They took the head around a carnival show, didn't they? Was that the guy?
I think this particular guy, they took the whole body.
Oh, did they?
They dressed him up as an outlaw, even though he was deteriorating over time.
There you go. And then your Blood and Treasure book that we had you on prior, so we'll give a plug to that show, is an editor's pick on Amazon. So congratulations for that.
Thank you. Yeah, that book, we were Bob Drury and I were very pleasantly surprised, because we knew he had an iconic character in Daniel Boone, who had a lot of adventures in the 1800s, 1790s, 1780s. But that helped. But we also didn't know, is there still an audience for that? And when the book came out, it immediately went to the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for a few weeks. It's been selling great in paperback. I hear from readers almost every day, and still I hear a lot of people about Blood and Treasure. It's just a fun book to read.
There you go. And a lot of great books do you have. How many books do you have total?
Well, I claim 18. I don't count them. Okay. And I worry, especially if they're more than 18, that I don't count them, because every so often you have somebody give you that backhand compliment, the prolific Tom Clavin. And you know what they're really saying is
it?
if this guy writes this many books, they can't be that good.
Oh, wow. Wow. I never thought that was
Right,
passive aggressive.
Jack Benny stopped at 39. He never turned older than 39. I've never written more than 18 books.
We have people on the show that have written 60. No, I think we have somebody who's done 150.
They can't be that good.
Well, they're all novels.
Oh, okay. That's different.
Yeah. And, once you kind of have the blueprint, I mean, they're all good, evidently, and they have a popular following, but, they've been writing all their life. They're old like us. And you've written a lot of great books. The Outlaws about the Dalton Gang. I'll give you a few plugs in here. Tombstone, Wild Bill, Dodge City. These are all movie things. One thing that was interesting here, The Last Man Out, the true story of America's heroic final hours of Vietnam. Wow. There you go.
Yeah, there's efforts to develop that into a limited, what they call a limited series, because the production company is looking at. They originally had it with the National Geographic Channel. Now I think it's someplace else, because 2025, April 2025, which is now less than 2 years away, is the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon.
Wow.
And, our book, Last Man Out, which I did with Bob Drury, is about when everybody abandoned the city on April 30th, 1975. We left 11 Marines on the roof of the American Embassy. And that morning, as the sun rises, they're peering down from the roof as 150,000 North Vietnamese troops are entering Saigon. And so the book is about how do they get out of there? How many get out of there? What happens? How do they get themselves out of there? And a lot of these guys, some of these guys are, I don't want to give too much away, but some of these guys are still alive. And,
wow.
The people, powers that be, thought that would make for a really exciting and gripping limited series to coincide with the 50th anniversary of the fall of Saigon. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that will definitely be interesting. What a harrowing story. I can't imagine being, we just kind of saw some of that in Afghanistan. I think we have somebody writing a book on that's been on the show. Well, thank you very much, Tom, for coming on the show. It was great to see you again. Wonderful to have you. Please come back and give us you gave us your .com, so we got that out of the way. Thanks, Monis, for tuning in. Order up the book wherever fine books are sold. Stay away from those alleyway bookstores because they're dangerous. You could get mugged. Follow Me to Hell. McNelly's, Texas Rangers, and the Rise of Frontier Justice. Available where fine books are sold. I'm going to have to find a new title for my memoir. Thanks for tuning in to my audience. Go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss, youtube.com/Chris Voss, and LinkedIn/Chris Voss, all the crazy places on the internet. Thanks for tuning in. Be good to each other. Stay safe. And we'll see you guys next time.